Ethan Walker had lived on his Arizona ranch for almost 12 years, and in all that time he had grown used to the long, quiet days and the slow rhythm of life. The mornings began with the sound of wind brushing through dry grass, the calls of distant birds, and the soft snorts of cattle waiting to be fed. It was a peaceful life, but also a lonely one. He ate alone, worked alone, rode alone, and slept alone. For years he kept telling himself that the land was enough, that it filled the empty spaces inside him. But as time passed, the silence in the house became heavier. The wooden table felt too large. The extra chair felt unnecessary. The nights grew longer, and the loneliness became harder to hide from. That was when he finally accepted advice from a few friends in town who told him he didn't have to spend his life without companionship. They encouraged him to write letters to a woman who was looking to move west and start a new life with a rancher. After weeks of thinking, he agreed. He wrote carefully, choosing honest words, describing his ranch, his work, and the kind of life he hoped to build with a partner. The woman, whom he knew only as Clara, wrote back with warm, hopeful letters. Her handwriting was neat, her tone gentle, and her words carried a sense of excitement for a future she had never seen. Ethan folded every letter neatly and kept them inside a small wooden box beside his bed, taking them out whenever he felt unsure about the future. Eventually, Ethan and Clara agreed that she would travel west to live with him. It took months of preparation. He fixed the guest room, painted the walls, stitched new curtains, and even bought a new kettle for the first time in years. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel quite so empty. There was laughter in his imagination, footsteps in the hall, a soft humming coming from the kitchen. Ethan knew those were only dreams, but they kept him warm at night. However, when the expected week of her arrival came, Clara did not appear. Ethan rode to town each morning, asking whether anyone had seen a woman arriving on a stagecoach from the east. The answer was always the same: no sign yet. He waited another week, still nothing. The third week passed, and the sheriff gave him a sympathetic look. "Sometimes people change their minds," he said quietly. Ethan nodded even though the words stung. The neighbors also began whispering. Some felt sorry for him. Others thought the situation strange. A few simply shook their heads, saying it was a risk to trust someone you had never met. Ethan didn't blame Clara. He knew the journey west was long and difficult. Maybe she had met someone closer to home. Maybe life had taken her in a different direction. Still, every morning he found himself unfolding one of her letters, reading the soft words she had written, and wondering where everything went wrong. The disappointment settled inside him like a cold stone. But he tried to carry on with his work. The cattle still needed care. The fences still needed repairs. Life didn't stop just because the heart did. One evening, when the sun was sinking behind the desert hills, Ethan noticed something unusual near the edge of his land. While riding along a fence line to check for broken posts, he caught sight of a figure standing near the tall shrubs. At first, he thought it might be a traveler or a lost ranch hand. But as he moved closer, he realized it was a young Apache woman. She stood very still, almost blending into the landscape. Her long dark hair moved gently with the breeze, and her eyes watched him with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Ethan slowed his horse. He didn't want to scare her. Encounters between settlers and Apache people were rare, and sometimes tense, mostly because of misunderstandings and fear created by stories passed from one person to another. But Ethan didn't feel afraid. He only felt concern. She looked tired, as if she had walked far. Her clothes were dusty, and her posture hinted at hunger and exhaustion. He raised his hand slowly in greeting, hoping she would understand he meant no harm. She didn't run. She just continued watching him carefully. When Ethan dismounted his horse and stepped closer, he noticed the shadows under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. He spoke gently, telling her he had water and food if she needed it. For a moment, she hesitated, glancing toward the horizon as if expecting someone to appear behind her. But she finally nodded. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but steady. She said her name was Naya. Before he could ask anything more, the sky darkened suddenly. Heavy clouds gathered, and a strong desert wind began pushing across the land. A storm was coming fast. Faster than either of them expected. Ethan gestured toward his ranch buildings. "The barn is close," he said. "You can wait out the storm there." Naya hugged her arms around herself and followed him without a word. The storm arrived just as they reached the barn. Rain poured down in thick sheets, drumming loudly against the roof. Inside, the light was dim, smelling of hay, leather, and warm animals. Ethan guided her to a space near the lantern and offered her a blanket. She sat carefully, still observing her surroundings, still unsure if she should trust him completely. He didn't push her to speak. Instead, he set down a small meal, bread, dried meat, and clean water. Naya accepted the food with quiet gratitude. She ate slowly, as if trying to make it last. Ethan sat a few feet away, giving her space. The storm outside made the barn feel like a safe pocket in a wild world. The sound of rain softened the silence between them. Even without many words, Ethan sensed she was not simply lost, she seemed troubled by something deeper. But he didn't want to ask yet. She needed rest more than explanations. After some time, Naya finally relaxed enough to shift closer to the lantern's glow. She watched Ethan, as if trying to understand him. Most settlers she had seen carried suspicion or fear in their eyes when they looked at someone from her people. Ethan's gaze was steady but gentle. He looked at her the same way he looked at his horses or the quiet desert, calmly, without judgment. The storm went on for hours, but inside the barn, time moved softly. Ethan checked his horse, adjusted the blankets, and made sure Naya stayed warm. Occasionally their eyes met, and each time, Naya looked away shyly, as if unused to kindness from a stranger. As the night deepened, Ethan felt something shift in the air, not dramatic, not spoken, but meaningful. Two people from different worlds, sharing shelter and silence, began to feel less like an accident, and more like the beginning of something neither could explain. When the rain finally softened, Ethan told her she could sleep in the barn for the night. He assured her she would be safe, and no one would disturb her. Naya nodded slightly, as if relief had finally touched her heart. Ethan stepped outside into the damp air, ready to head toward his house. But before he walked away, he turned back for one last look. Naya had laid down on the hay, wrapped in the blanket he'd given her. Her eyes were closed, but her expression was peaceful. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt something in his heart lighten. He wasn't sure why, maybe because helping her distracted him from his disappointment, or maybe because her quiet presence felt like a small spark of warmth in a life that had gone cold. He closed the barn door gently and walked toward his house under the fading rain. He didn't know who Naya really was, why she had come to his land, or what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he felt he wasn't entirely alone. The next morning arrived with soft sunlight spilling across the ranch. The storm clouds from the night before had faded, leaving behind a bright blue sky. Ethan stepped out of his house early, carrying a small basket with breakfast. He wasn't sure if Naya would still be in the barn, or if she had left quietly before sunrise, but something inside him hoped she was still there. When he opened the barn door, he found her awake, sitting near the doorway with the blanket folded neatly beside her. She had been watching the sky as if trying to understand the day before it began. Ethan greeted her gently. Naya replied with a small nod and a polite thank you for sheltering her. She seemed calm but distant, like someone still deciding whether she was safe. Ethan handed her the basket, and she hesitated for a moment before accepting it. Inside were warm biscuits, fresh water, and a bit of honey. Naya tasted the biscuits slowly, her eyes softening with appreciation. Food, shelter, and kindness were simple things, yet they carried great meaning for someone who had spent days wandering alone. For a while, they ate together in silence. Ethan didn't want to overwhelm her with questions, but he was curious about how she ended up so far from where Apache families usually traveled. After breakfast, she finally began to speak. Her voice was gentle but steady, the kind of voice that carried truth naturally. She told him her name again, Naya, and explained that she had been separated from her people during a trading visit near a river crossing. A misunderstanding caused confusion, and in the middle of it, she became separated from her group. She walked for days, trying to find familiar paths, but ended up farther and farther away. She didn't want settlers to misunderstand her presence, so she avoided towns and stayed close to nature, hoping to find her way back when the land felt familiar again. Ethan listened closely, sensing that her words held more weight than she was revealing. Her face remained calm, but her eyes showed exhaustion, and something that felt like sadness. When she finished, she glanced at him as if expecting him to doubt her story. Instead, he nodded and simply said he was glad she was safe. That surprised her. Most people she had met before either feared her or questioned her intentions. Ethan did neither. Naya then asked him about his life on the ranch. She had seen the neat fences, the organized barn, and the strong horses and cattle. She sensed that Ethan worked hard, but something about him felt incomplete, like a man carrying a weight that wasn't physical. Ethan took a slow breath before telling her why he lived alone. He told her about Clara, the woman he had been waiting for. He explained how they exchanged letters for months, how he prepared his home for her arrival, and how she never came. Naya listened without interrupting, her attention fully on him. She understood loneliness in her own way, and she understood disappointment too. When Ethan spoke of waiting at the stagecoach stop each morning, Naya felt something twist inside her chest. She didn't know Clara, but she could feel the heaviness of his story. When he finished, he tried to smile. But it was a tired smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. Naya lowered her gaze, thinking carefully before speaking. She asked him if he had heard any news about the woman. Ethan shook his head. He only knew she never arrived, and no messages came afterward. Naya hesitated, her fingers resting on her blanket, as if holding something inside. Finally, she spoke softly. She said she had seen Clara weeks earlier, near a river crossing not far from where she herself became separated from her people. Ethan's shoulders stiffened at the mention of the name, and he looked at Naya with surprise. She continued gently, explaining that Clara was not traveling west anymore. She had chosen a different path and decided not to continue toward Ethan's ranch. Ethan felt the truth hit him like a slow, heavy wave. It hurt, even after all those weeks of wondering. But Naya watched him carefully. Her eyes filled with empathy. She didn't speak to hurt him, she spoke because she believed he deserved the truth. In her culture, honesty was a form of respect, even when the truth carried pain. She believed people should not be left standing with an unanswered hope. Ethan took a long breath, and for a moment he could not respond. His heart felt heavy, but there was also a strange feeling of relief. At least now he knew. At least now the waiting had an answer. When he finally looked at Naya, he thanked her quietly. His voice was steady, but she could hear the sadness beneath it. Naya felt something stir inside her as she watched him. She admired the way he accepted the truth without anger. Many people would have reacted differently, but Ethan only breathed deeply, as though trying to let go of the weight he had carried for too long. She realized then that she had been holding back something else, something she wasn't sure how to share. Ethan asked her gently why she had seemed hesitant when speaking about Clara. Naya looked down at her hands, unsure how to explain herself. She wasn't ready to reveal everything, but she wanted to offer him some reassurance. She told him that his kindness, calmness, and patience were qualities she rarely saw, even among her own people. She said he had a strong spirit, one that seemed steady even when life didn't go as planned. Ethan felt a warmth rise in his chest. No one had complimented him like that in years. He didn't know how to respond except with a quiet smile. Naya's words were simple, but they touched him deeply. The morning passed gently. Ethan showed her around the ranch, careful to explain things slowly. Naya moved with quiet confidence, studying everything with interest. She walked lightly, as if the earth listened to her steps. Ethan noticed the way she observed animal tracks, the direction of the wind, and the patterns in the ground. She saw things he never noticed, and it amazed him. Later, as they sat near a corral watching the horses, Naya asked him why he continued to wait for someone who left without explanation. Ethan looked at the horses for a long moment before answering. He said he believed in promises, even if others didn't. He believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. He believed in hope, even when it felt foolish. Naya watched him closely. She admired his loyalty, but she also felt a quiet ache inside her chest. Part of her wished he had not waited so long for someone who did not value him. Part of her wished something she wasn't ready to name. As the sun moved across the sky, Naya grew quieter. Ethan noticed the change, sensing something was troubling her. When he asked if she was all right, she hesitated again. She seemed to be wrestling with something inside her, something she wasn't ready to reveal. Her eyes softened, and she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Fear not of him, but of her own emotions. When the afternoon light began to fade, Naya finally spoke again. She told him she was thankful for his kindness, that he had treated her with more respect than many had shown her before. She said she didn't want him to carry the burden of waiting for someone who chose not to come. She wanted him to understand that sometimes the people who leave are not the ones meant to stay. Ethan felt the meaning behind her words, even if she didn't say everything directly. He felt something shift inside him, a small but undeniable warmth, but he didn't yet understand why Naya seemed nervous as she spoke, why her eyes kept flickering away whenever he tried to meet them. He didn't realize that she was holding back a truth she didn't know how to share, a truth that would change everything between them. The day after Naya revealed the truth about Clara, something felt different between her and Ethan. Their conversations carried a softer tone, like both were suddenly more aware of each other's presence. Yet there was also a quiet tension, a feeling that something important was waiting to be said. Naya moved through the ranch with calm steps, but her eyes carried a thoughtful heaviness, as if she was fighting with her own thoughts. Ethan noticed the change, but didn't want to pressure her. She had already trusted him with the truth, and he knew trust should never be rushed. That morning, Ethan stepped outside to find Naya sitting near the corral, watching the horses with a distant expression. She looked peaceful, but there was something in her gaze that told him her mind was far away. He approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. When she noticed him, she offered a small smile that didn't hide the uncertainty in her eyes. He sat beside her, letting a gentle silence settle between them before speaking. He asked if she was all right. Naya hesitated, then nodded, though her expression said otherwise. Ethan didn't push further. Instead, he watched the horses with her, letting the calm rhythm of their breathing fill the air. After a minute, Naya exhaled deeply, as though finally ready to face the thoughts she had been holding inside. She began by telling him that she hadn't come to his ranch by accident. At first, Ethan didn't understand what she meant. She explained slowly, choosing her words with care, that during her journey after getting separated from her people, she met a traveler in town. That traveler was carrying a small picture, a photograph of a man looking away from the camera, standing beside a corral gate. A photograph Ethan knew well, because it was taken by a neighbor who jokingly wanted him to look important for a profile he sent with the marriage letters. Ethan felt his chest tighten as he realized she was talking about him. Naya continued softly. She said the traveler had been discussing the story of a rancher who had been waiting for a bride who probably wasn't coming anymore. People in the town felt sympathy for the rancher but had already moved on. What caught Naya's attention was not the story of disappointment, it was the photograph. She didn't know why, but the moment she saw it, she felt something stir inside her. A calmness, a pull, a feeling she could not explain. Something in the man's face, his tired eyes, his steady posture, his quiet strength made her pause. She said she felt as though fate had placed that photograph in front of her for a reason. Ethan listened in stunned silence. He thought she had wandered onto his land by chance. But now he realized she had chosen to come. Not because she was lost, but because something inside her felt guided toward him. Naya looked down at her hands as she kept speaking. She told him she didn't know exactly what she expected to find, but she wanted to see him for herself. She wanted to see if the feeling she experienced when looking at the photo was real or just a passing moment. So she walked. She followed the land, She listened to her instincts. And after days of travel, she reached his ranch. When she finished speaking, she lifted her head, her dark eyes shining with a mixture of courage and fear. Ethan felt his breath catch. He had never expected such a confession. He asked her if she felt pressured to tell him this, if she felt she owed him something. Naya shook her head quickly, almost urgently. She said she didn't want him to misunderstand. She wasn't there because she owed anyone anything. She wasn't there because she thought he needed someone to replace the woman who didn't come. She was there because she believed their meeting meant something. Ethan felt something warm push through the sadness he had been carrying for weeks. But he was also confused. He asked her gently if she was sure, if she felt driven by fear or loneliness, or the hardships she had faced while wandering. He didn't want her to feel trapped or obligated. Naya looked at him directly, then really looked at him, with a bravery he hadn't seen before in her eyes. She took a slow breath, and her voice became steady, filled with clarity and certainty. "It's not a mistake," she said quietly. "I'm yours." The words struck Ethan with a soft force. They were simple, but they carried an entire world inside them: hope, courage, choice, and something that resembled affection. Ethan's breath trembled slightly. He didn't know what to say at first. He had waited so long for someone who never came. Now, the woman standing in front of him, the one who cared enough to tell him the truth, who sought him out not because of a promise but because of a feeling, was offering him something far deeper than he had expected. He told her he didn't want her to feel tied to him, especially when she had a people and a culture that mattered deeply to her. But Naya shook her head again. She explained that she believed people could belong together even if they came from different worlds. Belonging wasn't about appearances or expectations. It was about truth shared between two hearts. She said her heart had already chosen before she even arrived at his ranch. Ethan felt something inside him open. Slowly, almost uncertainly, he reached out his hand to her. For a moment, he wondered if she would hesitate or pull away, but Naya placed her hand into his, warm and steady, without fear. The connection felt natural, like something that had been waiting quietly to happen. They sat together like that for a long while, hands joined, hearts calm. The world around them seemed to fall into silence. The wind slowed. The horses stopped moving. The distant hills glowed under the afternoon sun. Ethan felt as though he was seeing the ranch for the first time, not as a lonely place, but as a place where something new could begin. Naya finally spoke again, her voice gentle. She said she had been afraid to tell him the truth because she didn't know how he would react. She was aware that her presence on the ranch was already unusual to the townspeople. She worried that revealing her feelings would make things harder for both of them. She didn't want him to feel burdened by her choice. But after watching him accept the truth about Clara with such calmness, she believed he deserved her honesty too. Ethan told her that her honesty meant more to him than she could imagine. He explained that part of his heart had been closed for so long, first by loneliness, then by disappointment. But her presence had begun to heal something inside him. He felt peaceful around her, in a way he had never felt around anyone else. Naya's expression softened, and she looked relieved. The burden she had carried on her shoulders seemed to fade. She told him she didn't expect anything from him, not promises, not decisions, not changes. She only wanted him to know how she felt. Whether or not he felt the same, she wanted him to understand her truth. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. He said he didn't know what the future held, but he wanted to find out with her. The words made her eyes shine with quiet joy. It wasn't a loud reaction. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was simple, warm, and real. And sometimes, that was stronger than anything else. The sun continued lowering over the horizon, casting golden light around them. They didn't rush to stand or walk away. They stayed side by side, letting the land settle, letting their hearts settle. The silence between them was no longer heavy or awkward. It was comfortable, full of possibilities. That evening, as they walked back toward the house, something unspoken floated between them. A beginning, a connection, a gentle promise. Ethan didn't know how long Naya would stay, or what changes her feelings might bring, but he knew one thing. Clearly, he no longer saw her as a traveler who wandered onto his land by accident. She had chosen to be there, and slowly, Ethan began to realize he was choosing her too. In the days that followed Naya's confession, a new kind of rhythm settled over the ranch. Nothing dramatic happened, yet everything felt changed. Ethan found himself waking earlier than usual, wondering if Naya was already outside or still resting in the barn. Sometimes he found her sitting on a high rock near the corral, watching the sunrise as though reading messages in the colors of the sky. Other times she was quietly helping with chores before he even realized she was awake. She moved with a calm grace that made even the simplest work seem meaningful. Naya brought new life into the ranch without even trying. She had a natural way with animals, especially the horses. The ranch had a young mare known for being restless around people, but the mare behaved gently whenever Naya stood nearby. Ethan watched in amazement the first time he saw Naya place her hand on the mare's neck and whisper something in her own language. The horse relaxed almost instantly. Ethan asked how she did it, but Naya only smiled softly and said she listened with her heart before she used her hands. Life became easier with her presence. When a calf wandered off one morning, Ethan expected to spend hours searching for it, but Naya noticed faint tracks heading into the hills and guided him straight to the missing animal. She explained how the land left signs if someone paid attention. Ethan realized just how much knowledge she carried, knowledge he had never learned from ranch guides or neighbors. She knew the direction of the wind just by closing her eyes. She knew when rain was coming by the feeling in the air. She understood the desert, as if the land itself whispered to her. Ethan appreciated her skills, but what touched him more were the small moments. The way she saved half her breakfast to share with the barn cat. The way she laughed softly whenever the chickens chased each other. The way she paused to appreciate simple things, a flower growing between rocks, or a bird singing alone on a fence. Her presence made the ranch feel less empty, less silent. He had grown used to loneliness over the years, and suddenly he began to forget what it felt like. Still, not everything was simple. The nearby town was small, and people talked. When Ethan brought Naya with him on a supply trip one afternoon, he noticed the curious eyes immediately. Some people nodded politely, but others stared with confusion or whispered behind their hands. They weren't unkind, but they weren't used to seeing someone like Naya walking beside a rancher, as though she belonged there. Ethan saw the looks and felt a protective warmth gather in his chest. At the general store, Mrs. Turner, a friendly older woman, greeted Ethan warmly but paused when she saw Naya. Ethan introduced her. Mrs. Turner's expression softened, and she offered a gentle hello. Naya responded politely, her tone respectful, but outside, a few men near the hitching post exchanged glances and murmured something that didn't sound friendly. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't say anything to them, but Naya noticed the change in his posture. She touched his arm lightly and shook her head. It was her quiet way of telling him she didn't want conflict. She had faced misunderstandings before. She knew how to carry herself calmly. As they rode home, Ethan apologized for the uncomfortable moment. Naya shook her head again and told him she was used to being seen differently. She said people fear what they don't know, but she also said that with time, people could learn. Her tone held no bitterness, only understanding. Ethan realized then that her strength did not come from fighting. It came from patience and a peaceful spirit. In the evenings, they shared quiet conversations. Ethan taught her how to repair fences and explained how to manage the ranch accounts. Naya listened with interest, asking questions whenever something confused her. She wanted to understand his world just as much as he wanted to learn hers. In return, Naya told him about her people's traditions, how they valued respect, courage, and balance with the earth. She spoke of her family, her childhood, and stories passed down through generations. Ethan found her stories more comforting than any book he had ever read. Over time, their connection deepened. It wasn't rushed or spoken too quickly. It grew slowly, like a desert plant finding strength through quiet days and warm nights. Their bond became clear in the way they laughed together, in how they understood each other's silence, in how they shared responsibilities without needing many words. Ethan began to look forward to every moment beside her. He didn't need to say the word love to feel it quietly blooming inside his heart. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with soft reds and golds, Naya and Ethan stood near the water trough, watching the cattle settle for the night. A warm wind brushed past them, carrying the scent of sage. Ethan turned to her and thanked her for everything she had brought into his life, her help, her honesty, her presence. Naya listened quietly, and her eyes softened. She told him she felt grateful too, because he treated her with respect, something she had not always received from strangers. She said she felt safe around him, not because the ranch had strong walls, but because his heart felt steady. Ethan looked at her, and for a moment he struggled to speak. He wanted to tell her what she meant to him, but the words felt too heavy in his throat. Instead, he picked up her hand gently and held it, the way he had done the day she told him, "I'm yours." Their quiet moment was interrupted suddenly when a rider approached from the distance. Ethan recognized the horse it belonged to, Mr. Hale, a traveling merchant who often carried news across the region. Hale greeted them and handed Ethan a small wrapped package. Then he turned to Naya, his expression thoughtful. He said he had met some Apache people a few days earlier, and they mentioned a young woman missing from their group. They suspected it was Naya and wanted her to know they were nearby, camped near a river not far from Ethan's ranch. Naya's expression changed. She was relieved to hear her people were close, but she also felt anxiety rise inside her. She knew her people would ask questions. They might not understand why she had stayed so long with a rancher. They might think she had been mistreated or forced to remain. Ethan saw the concern on her face and felt a similar worry in his chest. He feared they would take her away or look at him with suspicion. After Hale rode away, the evening grew quiet again. But the mood had shifted. Naya stood silently, her thoughts deep and troubled. Ethan gently asked if she wanted to meet her people. She nodded slowly. She said she didn't want them to worry, but she feared how they would react to her decision to stay at the ranch. Ethan felt the weight of her words. He realized the future he hoped for with her might not be simple. That night, Naya and Ethan sat outside near the barn, watching the stars. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence around them was not peaceful, like before it carried worry and uncertainty. At last, Naya turned to Ethan and told him everything would work out. She said her people valued truth and courage. If she explained her choice clearly, they would listen. But Ethan knew she was trying to comfort him. He could see the fear behind her eyes. He reached for her hand, and she held his tightly. Their bond had grown strong, but now it faced its first true test. They didn't know what the next day would bring: acceptance, rejection, or something in between. But they knew one thing clearly. Whatever happened, they were no longer two strangers meeting by chance. They had become something more: two hearts from different worlds walking into an uncertain future, hoping their bond would be strong enough to guide them through what was coming. The next morning, the air felt unusually still. Ethan stepped outside his house and saw Naya already awake, standing near the edge of the field, as if listening to something far away. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried a quiet mixture of hope and worry. She knew the day had come to face her people again. And she knew that whatever happened in the next few hours would shape the future for both her and Ethan. Ethan approached her slowly. He didn't want to disturb her thoughts, but he needed to make sure she wasn't carrying her fears alone. She turned to him with a small smile that didn't hide her nervousness. He asked if she was ready. Naya nodded, though her fingers tightened around the blanket she held. She said she didn't fear her people, but she feared they might misunderstand her choice. She didn't want Ethan blamed for anything. She didn't want anyone thinking he had forced her to stay. Ethan felt a heavy pressure on his chest. He had no idea how her people would react, but he knew he had to face them with respect and honesty. He wanted them to see the truth that Naya had come to him by her own choice, and that he respected her deeply. He saddled his horse, while Naya prepared herself. When they were ready, they rode side by side toward the river where her people were camped. The journey was quiet. The sound of the horse hooves echoed through the dry land. A gentle breeze moved across the grass, brushing past them like a silent reminder that nature was watching. Ethan kept glancing at Naya, noticing how she looked ahead with steady determination. She was afraid, yes, but also brave. He admired her strength more than he could ever express. As they neared the river, signs of her people became clear. There were tracks in the dirt, smoke rising from a small fire, and distant figures moving among the trees. Ethan slowed his horse, giving Naya time to collect herself. She breathed in deeply, then exhaled with calm purpose. When they reached the clearing, several Apache riders emerged from the trees, their faces serious and cautious. They recognized Naya immediately, and their expressions shifted from surprise to relief. One of the riders, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. Naya greeted him respectfully, addressing him as one of the senior members of her people. He asked her where she had been, why she had stayed away so long, and whether she was harmed. His voice wasn't harsh, but it carried the authority of someone responsible for the safety of many. Naya explained everything with steady honesty. She told them how she got separated, how she traveled alone, and how she met Ethan. She told them that Ethan had shown her kindness, given her shelter, and treated her with respect. She made it clear that he never forced her to stay, never raised his voice at her, and never took advantage of her situation. She said she stayed because she felt something in her heart, something that made her believe their paths were meant to cross. Ethan watched quietly, allowing her to speak first. He didn't want to interrupt or speak out of turn. When Naya finished, the man turned his attention to Ethan. His expression was unreadable. Ethan felt his heart beat harder, but he stepped forward courageously. He introduced himself respectfully and told them he was honored to meet them. He didn't use complicated words. He spoke simply and honestly. He told them he had been waiting for someone who never came, and that Naya entered his life during a very difficult time. He told them he never asked her for anything, never expected help from her, and never planned for her to stay. He explained that she stayed because she wanted to, and he never tried to stop her from returning to her people. The senior man listened carefully, studying Ethan's face. The silence that followed felt long and heavy. Ethan stood still, refusing to look away or show fear. He knew trust couldn't be forced. He could only show his truth and hope they believed it. Finally, the senior man spoke. He said Naya had always been strong and thoughtful, and if she had chosen to stay with Ethan, then there must be a reason. He said their people valued choice, courage, and honesty. If Naya believed her path was with Ethan, then he would not fight against her decision. He added that sometimes life brings unexpected connections, and they must be respected. Naya's eyes softened with relief. Ethan felt tension drain from his shoulders. But the elder wasn't finished. He stepped closer and told Ethan that if he ever mistreated Naya, lied to her, or made her feel small, then the Apache people would come for her. There was no anger in his voice, only fierce protection. Ethan nodded respectfully and assured him that Naya would always be treated with dignity. The elder then placed his hand gently on Naya's shoulder, telling her she would always have a place with her people. She could visit whenever she wished, and they would welcome her warmly. Naya nodded, grateful for his understanding. When the Apache riders finally rode back toward their camp, Ethan and Naya remained standing by the river, letting the moment settle inside them. On the ride back to the ranch, Naya was quiet, but her silence felt peaceful, rather than heavy. Ethan asked how she felt. She said she felt free to choose her future without worry, free to follow her heart without fear of hurting others. She said she was thankful the meeting went well, but more thankful that Ethan stood beside her through all of it. When they returned to the ranch, the sky was glowing golden with evening light. The land looked calm, as if embracing them after a long journey. Ethan helped Naya down from her horse, and they stood facing each other for a few moments, feeling the weight of everything they had experienced. In the days that followed, Naya became an even deeper part of the ranch. She moved from the barn to the spare room in the house, though she arranged it in a simple way that reminded her of her people's traditions. She and Ethan shared more meals, more stories, and more quiet moments watching the sunrise or the stars. Their connection grew naturally, without pressure or rushed decisions. One evening, while they were repairing a wagon wheel together, Ethan suddenly realized something. For years he had waited for someone who was only a name on paper. He had imagined a future built on letters and promises, but the real future, the true one, had walked into his barn during a storm. And unlike the woman who never came, Naya had chosen him willingly, bravely, and honestly. A few weeks later, when Naya mentioned a small ceremony her people performed to honor important life choices, Ethan asked her if she wanted to do one for their bond. Naya looked at him with warm eyes and said yes. They planned a simple ceremony, nothing grand, nothing loud, just something true. On a quiet afternoon, with the golden desert light around them, they stood together near the corral. A few of Ethan's kind neighbors attended, and 2 Apache elders came as well. Naya placed her hand on Ethan's, and he covered it gently with his own. They exchanged simple vows not written by anyone else, not guided by any tradition except the truth they both felt. They promised to respect each other, to walk through difficult moments together, to listen with honesty, and to protect the peace they found in each other. There were no grand speeches, no loud celebrations, only warm smiles, soft hearts, and a sense of beginning. After the ceremony, as the guests left and the sky faded into deep orange, Ethan and Naya stood alone together. She looked up at him and said that everything happened exactly as it was meant to. He agreed, softly. From that day forward, Ethan no longer waited for someone who never arrived. His future had found him in the most unexpected way through a wandering woman with a brave heart, who looked him in the eye and said, "It's not a mistake, I'm yours." And he knew those words were not just a moment of courage, they were the truth that changed his life forever.